Now, earlier this year, I brought in a heavyweight in the world of cycling aerodynamics to GTN, none other than Simon Smart from Drag to Zero. We explored a number of products that claim to give us an aerodynamic saving. We looked at that saving versus their cost, giving us a cost per watt. And it seems like you guys enjoyed that, but in all honesty, we were only just getting started. There were so many more products that we wanted to look into, but just simply ran out of time. So here is our slightly more geeky version of cost per watt version 2.0. Okay, so as with last time, we're going to be comparing a bunch of products that all claim to save us a certain number of watts. We're going to be looking at that saving alongside their price, therefore allowing us to calculate how much each and every one of those watts is costing us. Of course, this isn't exact science. There are so many variables at play when we look at cycling aerodynamics, but someone that does have a very good idea in this department is Simon Smart. He has probably more cycling aerodynamic experience than most people in the world, with 15 years of experience as well as experience within F1. So I think he's a pretty good place to start and a very good source, and he did a very good job last time. So time to give Simon a call. Right, hi Simon, thanks again for joining us today. Now, we're going to get a little more geeky today, but before we do that, should we start by setting some baseline rules, as we did with last time? Now, you typically do a lot of your testing at 50 kilometers an hour. We're going to run it a little bit lower than that. We're going to go 40 kilometers an hour this week.
Yeah, that's right. It can be very confusing because, you know, the numbers are, if you quote a wattage gain at 50 kph, it's virtually double what it is at 40 kph. So the numbers we're talking about now are more realistic and related to someone who's racing at 40 kph, which is what we're really interested in. But sometimes the numbers might feel quite small, but they're actually quite significant.
Okay, so should we delve on in? And I'm gonna start with I guess a slightly unusual one, maybe not something that people think of as something to get aero gains in, and that is their pedals. Now, a lot of people out there using something like a Look KO2 Max pedal or similar, and I want to compare that alongside something like the Speedplay Zero Aero, which is, well, essentially, as the name suggests, it is an aero pedal, and it's almost got a covering around the base of it, so it's a very sleek design. Now, what is the kind of difference between those pedals? What are we seeing, and then what's the watt saving?
Yeah, it's surprising how sensitive the flow is around the foot, and you can imagine that, you know, a messy pedal can really disturb the flow on the sole of the foot, and it's not something you really ever think about because you're never really looking at it. But it's quite a hard thing to test, you know, when you're starting to deal with people pedaling and using pedaling mannequins and things. It's quite challenging because it's quite a dynamic environment. So. I know that's how our job's getting harder and harder these days, because we're trying to identify those small gains with a lot of kind of noise in the system. So once things start spinning, rotating, it's harder to take those measurements. So, you know, there's a sort of bandwidth there. You might find with someone it's more like 3 watts, and someone else it's 1.5 watts. But there's a level of experimental error in there as well that you've got to include. So I'd say, you know, as a safe bet, it would be a nice, clean 2 watt gain.
Okay, and you've tested more people than probably anyone out there, so you'll know. And that's like, in terms of a cost per watt, I mean, Speedplay Zero Aero pedals typically come in at around £230. That's about £115 per watt. And actually, before we move on, I think I'm right in saying the Speedplay Zero Aero pedals have like a dimple effect on the base. What is it around these dimples that why are they seen on aero products? What do they actually help and do? Well,
I mean, it's a bit of a, people do question it, because it's obviously it comes from the famous thing with a golf ball, and you know, a lot of these shapes you consider in bicycle aerodynamics aren't spinning like that. But it's just really texture in the flow, and personally, probably a finer texture would give you a slightly better result than having the dimples on there.
Now moving on to hydration systems. Now this is really interesting. So we talked a little bit last time around kind of just bottles on the frame versus no bottles behind the saddle. This time I actually want to talk about the front hydration systems. So we're seeing more and more bikes with integrated hydration systems, but also you can get the add-on sort of aftermarket hydration systems. So can we delve into this then? So what is the, like maybe a potential watt saving, because I believe there is, between having no hydration system on the front and then having an integrated hydration system?
That's right. The really clean integrated systems like a nose cone tend to give you the same frame drag when the wind is straight on, but as you go into a crosswind, you actually get a side force and a sail effect from the nose cone. So you find that I'd say typically you could expect to see maybe up to a 1.5 watt gain from that nose cone device in a crosswind. So overall, on average, if you said for all the conditions you're in, maybe it's something like a 0.7 watt gain. That would be fair. And similarly, with some of the aftermarket bottles as well, we do find similar advantage with the advantage in a crosswind.
So, I mean, taking like a Canyon Speed Max, their older model now, if we looked at their setup without a hydration system, which comes in at around just shy of £3,000 versus their integrated one, which is around £6,500, that would be around £3,500 per watt saving, but obviously you're getting a lot more than just an integrated hydration system with that. So actually looking at an aftermarket product, one of the most popular ones is the Profile Design Aero systems. Now, as you kind of have mentioned, they are really good, but I imagine probably not as good maybe as the fully integrated system. So let's say a watt saving with that, and that, you're talking £110 per watt there. So yeah, interesting. Next one we're going to move on to is chain rings. So this is again something that people maybe don't always think of, but a lot of bikes typically come with the kind of the open design chain rings, but there are closed design sort of TT Aero chain rings. What is the kind of saving we could see on these sort of chain rings?
Yeah, it's an interesting one actually. I mean, to be honest, we're more driven by going to the big rings because of other reasons for gearing, and it's then when you actually sort of, I was looking at the flow and CFD and things, and you appreciate how much it does tidy up the flow. It's surprising. It really does help to align the flow, which is, it's such a messy area down in the middle of the bike, around your feet, the bottom bracket. I think again it's a tricky thing to measure because you really need to have something pedaling, but I'd say that it's around 0.7 watt gain that we get from a nice aero chain ring.
Yeah, so I mean, typically like an aero chain ring you could pick up for around 90 to 100 quid, some cheaper obviously. So yeah, we're talking 90 quid for 0.7 watt saving. I mean, if we did equate that to a watt saving, you're talking £129 per watt. But anyway, that's getting a bit complicated there. Next interesting bit though is bar tape. Now you'll have noticed, or our viewers will have noticed, a lot of people now opting for no bar tape or kind of skateboard grip tape, and I'm quite keen to delve into this with you. What is the reasoning here, and what is the saving, if there is any? Actually,
more so than ever, with everybody's going to the hydro levers. If the diameter of the actual bar isn't sort of flush, you get some flow separation behind there. So actually, by putting tape on there, if at worst doesn't cost you anything, and it could be a small gain, as long as it's not too thick. So having grip tape or a thinnish foam tape on there is absolutely fine. And if anything, I'd say I could imagine it could even improve drag by 0.2 watts or so.
Okay, that's very interesting. All right, next one then, socks. Now, everyone likes to poke fun at triathletes for not wearing socks, of course, but what about compression socks? And then also the sort of the Aero trip socks that we see, mostly like TT riders wearing, but also there are other brands out there like Enduro doing them for triathlon. And what are the sort of savings we see from no socks, compression socks, and then your fully fledged sort of Aero trip socks?
Yeah, I mean, the compression socks has got, obviously they're not necessarily designed where someone's choosing the texture for aerodynamics, but it happens that the rough materials they tend to use are actually effective, and I'd say typically can give you a half watt to a watt saving. But the thing about texturing as well is it tends to work at specific speeds. So that's the real challenge with fabrics, is that you can find a fabric that's really fantastic at say 45 kph, but it could be slower at 40 and slower at 50. So it's the challenge. Some fabrics are better at covering the speed range and giving you an advantage over the whole speed range. So certainly, if you go to the other end of the spectrum, I would say that you could gain from a trip sock with discrete trips up to maybe, let's say, 4 watts. So we've gone from the compression sock at say half a watt to 4 watts. But and the other thing is, if it can also be slower as well if the trip's in the wrong place. So what we find is a middle road, or something that's always working, is something like the ribbed fabric. It's not overall as fast as a trip, but it works 95% of the time, rather than, I'd say, maybe personally, it's a very difficult thing to predict, but you could say that it maybe only works 10 or 15% of the time.
And then what sort of kind of saving might we see on one of those, the safer kind of trip sock then?
Oh, sorry, yeah, I didn't mention that. Yeah, so I'd say you could assume an average of a safe 2 watt gain from a trip sock with plain rib fabric or a textured fabric.
Yeah, so sort of £25 for those kind of socks, and that's £13 per watt, so that's pretty good. Now, next one, and I know this is going to be a tricky one to answer because it's around helmet position. This is so personal and dependent, and you can have a very good aero helmet on someone, but it could be pointing up in the air. But I do want to talk about kind of having the tail of the aero helmet proud from the body, and then the tail of the aero helmet tucked into the body, into the back. What the difference we might see, and there are also ways in which we can achieve that, right? So I just wanted to get your input on this one.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think that it's quite fascinating to look at the helmet development over the last 10 years. I mean, when I think back to when we were first testing riders, most helmets had long tails, and that was one of the challenges. If you didn't have that helmet in just the right position, it could be actually detrimental, and a tail sticking up invariably could be costing you maybe, I'd say, typically 2.5 watts, as opposed to making a helmet fit someone properly. And that's what really drove everyone to the short tails, because in a lot of the time, I think sort of it was almost like bad education back then. For the few people who come in the wind tunnel, they knew it was important, but for anyone else, they just stuck a helmet on, tail was sticking up in the air, the helmet was slower. And then stubby helmets were born, and they were actually going faster because the tail wasn't working in the first place. And now I see we're going through an evolution, we're coming back to this mid-length tail. And at the end of the day, a tail, if it fits right and it's filling that void around the back of your neck and controlling the flow onto your shoulders, it has to be a winner. But it's that challenge of, as you say, making it fit right and finding the helmet that works for you.
And I know some brands are making helmets now that are adjustable, so you can adjust the tilt. Something that I've done before, and I know you have done with athletes as well, is actually putting some kind of like foam padding in the front and almost tilting it around yourself. I mean, I've picked that stuff up for 10 quid. I think it's like go-kart padding or something like that. So we're saying it's like 2.5 watts, something around that region, for a tail sticking up in the air versus down. I mean, that's a pretty good saving if you can get that to work. So that's sort of £4 per watt. That's not bad. But as you say, obviously it's worth checking out other helmets, especially for triathletes who are racing over longer distances, when you might be moving your head around quite a lot and not being able to hold that aero position. So that's really interesting. Now, we're kind of done with the cost per watt, but I did want to go into some fun kind of additional sections. So one was around bolts on our frame. Now, I've seen plenty of athletes, I haven't done this myself before, but taping up bolts on their frame. Like, does that actually make a difference?
Well, I mean, it's a broad question. You could have, if it's in a sensitive area, taping up a bolt can make quite a big difference. But I suppose where I have a lot of experience is when we're developing frames, quite often we use modular sort of mules with SLA printed parts that we screw on, and then we will sort of clean it all up and fill those holes in manually. And I'd say it isn't as much as you'd imagine. I don't think. I see a lot of people that are absolutely paranoid about a bit of tape that's sort of they've not put a tape over their bolt hole, and I think in some ways you could have yourself over more if that bit of tape isn't like stuck perfectly down to not bothering in the first place. But yeah, it's the kind of thing. It's good practice, and I guess if you were cleaning up a bike and we were testing it, doing a final wind tunnel test or something, you wanted to make sure it was all perfect, you might find 0.2 watts or something in that.
It's good news. And then finally, a watch on your wrist. And like triathletes, obviously the distance of the race, they want their metrics, the data there. And having a watch is the obvious answer for that. Does it make a difference having a watch bulging out on the side of your wrist?
I think, again, position, but if you've got a higher arm position, then actually having when I used to race with a watch, I would always just twist it around, and if it's on the back of the wrist, it's not really costing you much. If anything, if you look into CFD or something, you can see that you've got this sort of low pressure sort of in the cavity behind, and by filling it with a watch or something, actually could improve drag slightly. So you can almost get it in a similar position as you do with today's kind of current Garmin mounts, where you aim to get the computer sort of behind this area here. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. I think it's twisted around the back. If it's around the front, then I think it probably could cost you a watt or 1 or 2 watts.
Okay, that's really interesting. Well, there we go. That's answered it for some triathletes out there. Well, thanks ever so much for that today, Simon.
Nice to talk to you.
Absolutely brilliant.
No problem. It's a pleasure.
Well, that has been super interesting. I think Simon deserves a whole series on our channel because he has a wealth of experience for sure. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. If so, please do give it a like. Do get involved in the comments section down below, because if there's any products perhaps you want us to look into and ask Simon about in the future, or any other ideas for that matter, get involved, drop them down there. Don't forget to give GTN a follow over on social media, and also if you're not doing so already, give us a subscribe just down below.